This is an event called Routes to Independence, and we're here tonight to discuss the varying ways in which we can achieve a majority that would put forward a motion within the Scottish Parliament to achieve Scottish independence. I'm glad to introduce you to our three speakers. We have John Wilson, who is speaking on behalf of AFI. We have Stephanie Callaghan, who is speaking on behalf of the Scottish National Party, and we have Julie McAnulty, who's speaking on behalf of the ISP. The way that we're going to deal with tonight is we'll have three speakers who will speak to you. First off will be John Wilson, second will be Stephanie Callaghan, and third will be Julie McAnulty. Lots were drawn earlier. After each speech, we'll open up for questions for the individuals, and thereafter, when we've concluded the individual portion of this event, we'll open up for general questions if there's any out there. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to John Wilson to speak on behalf of the AFI. John, would you like to give us a presentation on why we should be voting AFI?
Thank you, David. And I'm here representing Action for Independence. The background to Action for Independence goes back a number of years, and I think it stems from discussions that took place in 2016 when clearly the SNP did well in the constituencies throughout Scotland, but did badly in the regions. And there's a feeling then that no, we could do better in the regions because the amended D'Hondt system that operates in the Scottish Parliament means that if you do well in constituencies, you get penalised in the regions. But what happened after 2016, a number of people had discussions individually and in small groups. And last year, beginning of last year, a number of people came together and decided they wanted to set up something that could actually galvanise the Yes movement, smaller indie parties and others to get on board and look at setting up and being there as an alternative vote within the list. Unfortunately, when the originally called Alliance for Independence went for registration with the Electoral Commission in September this year, the Electoral Commission balked at the idea of using the name Alliance and made us go through several hoops. And we only registered or finally registered with the Electoral Commission in February this year. So we have been late off the blocks in getting things organised. But since then, we have now have a membership, we've had a conference, and we're in the process of doing a regional list selections. Candidates' nomination papers have just been passed in literally today. The nomination papers came in and the ranking will take place over the next week. So we're hoping to field a full list of candidates throughout Scotland to ensure that people have got that opportunity to participate and vote for Action for Independence. And the list of candidates we've got come from a range of backgrounds. We've got our leader, Dave Thompson, who was 55 years in the SNP, was 9 years in the Scottish Parliament, firstly as a list MSP and then as a constituency MSP. He took the decision last year to resign his membership of the SNP to help lead the Action for Independence through this campaign and be the leader coming up to the election. There's myself, of course. I've been an SNP councillor as well as an SNP MSP. I was a member of the minority administration, SNP administration in the Scottish Parliament, and I was also a member of the majority administration in the Scottish Parliament. So I've seen it from the position of the SNP being in the minority and being in the majority. In fact, I was sitting on the NEC in 2007 when we took the decision that we would go forward as a minority administration, and that was without any support of any other party, which was unique within the Scottish Parliament, because previously there had been coalition administrations, but the SNP took the decision to go on their own. The reality is that in terms of what we've got coming forward is in terms of candidates, the list of candidates that put their names forward for Action for Independence. We've got former Labour MEP. We've got Craig Murray has just recently came on board, and anybody who's involved in the independence movement will know who Craig Murray is. And we've just recently a new recruit, Yvonne Ridley, journalist, campaigner, and someone who knows the real struggles of campaigning for your rights, and who's basically held by the Taliban, and is a strong campaigner for women's rights. So they've brought on Yvonne Ridley, along with a whole range of campaigners, independence campaigners, former members of the SNP, and members of other parties have come on board with Action for Independence to stand in the lists throughout Scotland. The situation, as I mentioned earlier, the 2016 regional results showed clearly the SNP, or the independence vote, was being seriously hampered because of the way the DeHont system operates. And you just need to look at Central Scotland as a good example of that. What we ended up with is SNP took every constituency in Central Scotland. They got 129,000 votes plus in the regional list, and yet never achieved anything on the regional list. What we did get in return for that 129,000 were 4 Labour MSPs and 3 Tories. And clearly, if that 129,000 votes had been directed towards supporting a party that supports independence, it's independence at the core of its philosophy, then that 129,000 votes could have been used to deliver pro-independence MSPs, and actually ended up with more MSPs supporting independence in the Scottish Parliament. So that's part of the reason why Action for Independence has put itself forward in this election, because we believe that using some of that vote, we could actually achieve a supermajority in the Scottish Parliament. And you just need to look at some of the figures. And some of the figures, 12% of that SNP vote, or the independence vote, in 2016 could elect a pro-Indie MSP in Central Scotland. 25%, and I'm just talking about the people who voted for the SNP on the list, 25% of that vote could achieve a situation where you end up with 2 pro-independence MSPs sitting in the Parliament. And you just take those figures and calculate that and translate that throughout throughout Scotland, you would end up with potentially 8 or 16 or potentially 24 pro-independence MSPs sitting alongside the SNP, advocating independence and getting that argument over there. And it basically means that you'd have the supermajority that would be between potentially 80 and 90 MSPs in the Scottish Parliament advocating independence. The other issue regarding this is that if you did that and you used those votes, at the present moment, just over 900,000 votes throughout Scotland that were basically in 6 regions, the SNP didn't gain anything on the list. If you were to use those votes and elect Action for Independence members, then that supermajority sitting in that parliament would send a clear message to Westminster and to the unionist parties. It would also reduce the number of Labour and Tory MSPs sitting in the parliament, because if these votes were going to a party, a pro-independence party, then that reduces the opportunity for Labour and Tory MSPs to get elected. As I said, it sends a clear message to Westminster that the people of Scotland want independence by voting in people into the Scottish Parliament that actually support independence, and it gives the people of Scotland the confidence that they've got a Parliament that has a supermajority of MSPs committed to that sole goal of getting independence, but also sends a clear message to Westminster that they can no longer fudge the issue in whether or not Scotland has the right to self-determination. Because if we get that supermajority, then there is no excuse for Westminster to stand in its way of the Scottish people achieving independence. So it's really trying to get that message quite clearly over to Westminster, to the unionist parties, that the game is over. We're going to use the system that they devised in 1998 to stop the SNP from originally getting a majority. We're going to use that same system to get a majority of pro-independence MSPs that are going to push to get independence for Scotland. Not in 5 years' time, not in 10 years' time, but as soon as possible, as soon as deliverable, we get that independence for Scotland. As I said earlier, the Action for Independence sole goal is to achieve independence. And it's about trying to do that. A route map quite clearly outlines that what we're saying is we shall put independence at the heart of our manifesto for the Holyrood independence elections. And we called it the independence elections in 2021 because we believe this is the best opportunity to get that. And we tried to get other parties on board to say we should actually make this the plebiscite election, to say if we get a majority in both the constituency votes and the list votes, then that is the plebiscite that's been held to determine the future of the Scottish people and the independence for Scotland. We, as I said, we campaigned to bring on board a wide range of smaller independence parties to campaign alongside us to get, make that an alliance. As I said, the original name of the organisation was the Alliance for Independence, but we tried to get smaller parties on board. And basically, we urge voters to vote for the SNP in the constituencies and vote for Action for Independence on the list. We will, as I said, campaign for a majority of pro-independence MSPs, and we clearly see this as the independence election, and the election confirms a mandate for independence as soon as possible. And we actually say we campaign for independence by all legal means to achieve that. But as I said, if we can get that supermajority, then that supermajority hopefully sends a clear message to Westminster and the unionist parties that we want, or the Scottish people want, independence delivered and not delayed. And I would argue that May the 6th is a mandate and should be a mandate for Scottish independence. And I would urge people to vote for the SNP in the constituencies and vote for the Action for Independence on the list to achieve that supermajority. Thank you.
Sorry, I had muted myself. Thanks, John. Thanks for your input, your presentation there. I've got a few questions, which I'll put to use individually, and hopefully we can eke out some further detail of what a vote for the AFI would constitute. So the first question I've got written down here is, what is the target number, a percentage of votes that you think the AFI would require to return one or two candidates in each area?
As I said, if you take it from, I use the figures for the SNP vote in each region, and if you look at the vote, then it would be 12% of the vote that went to, compared to 2016, 12% of that vote would return an Action for Independence MSP. Then you go into 25%, a quarter of the people who voted for the SNP on the list in 2016, if they voted for Action for Independence, you would deliver 2. And then you start going into other figures, and potentially you could end up with 3. And we're looking at the kind of target of saying potentially there is an opportunity there to elect 3 Action for Independence candidates on the list, if just using the votes, and that's using less than 50% of the total votes that went to the SNP in 2016. So if that 50% of that vote, you would end up with 3 Action for Independence MSPs. And that's not including looking at the permutations of other political party supporters, like there are members in the Labour Party and people who vote for Labour on the list that may think, yeah, they'll give Labour the vote in the constituency, but what they'll do is they'll give a pro-independence party like Action for Independence the vote on the list because they support independence, because there are, believe it or not, Labour supporters out there and Labour voters that do believe in independence, and that gives them an opportunity to vote for the Action for Independence on the list as well.
Following that up then, why do the likes of yourself and others within the AFI feel the need to stand on the list? What is the driver behind that desire to stand on the list? And some would say stand against the Scottish National Party, who have so far delivered 1 referendum.
The issue, as I said, David, in my contribution earlier, is that when you look at 900,000 votes plus being cast in the list system, in 6 regions in Scotland in 2016, the SNP never returned any MSPs. What for that 900,000 plus votes, the number of list MSPs returned for the SNP in 2016 was 4, and that was in the Borders and the Highlands. What we're saying is, why waste all those votes? Why waste the 900,000 votes that have been cast for the SNP on the list when they could be used to deliver pro-independence MSPs that will sit alongside the SNP and will advocate independence alongside the SNP? Because at the present moment, as I said, the Hunt system that operates in the Scottish Parliament penalises parties when they do well in the constituencies. And that, in my view, penalises the demand and desire for independence. And if they vote for Action for Independence on the list, then what they're voting for is a block of MSPs that will sit alongside the SNP to, as I said, advocate for independence as early as possible.
Thanks again. One last question for the moment, John, as as you said in your answer and reply there, is that you will sit in a block in support of an SNP government. So I think you alluded earlier as well that you were only going along on that independence basis. So why would I or anybody else vote for you if you are going to support maybe a policy, the government, that you don't actually support yourself? So as we're aware, there's been issues over the GRA and over the the equality bill that's going through. So if you're going to support the government and I was against those policies, where is the AFI a party for me or a vote for me?
Well, David, you've got to decide what is your priority. Is your priority about getting independence for Scotland, or having a debate about issues that, if you had an independent Scotland, would be better decided within that parliament? And what we have said is we will support the SNP government, but members, individual Action for Independence members, will have the opportunity to vote as their conscience sees fit, but they will not vote to bring down an SNP government. They will not vote to actually bring down a government that is committed to delivering independence. And the part of the debate that we're having just now in relation to some of the policy issues that are coming out in terms of the Scottish Parliament is that these policy issues are being developed and decided in an arena which is still being dictated to by Westminster. And if we can get independence, then some of the issues that are being debated and some of the contentious issues that are going through the Parliament at the present moment could be decided and fairly decided by the Scottish people if we were independent and we looked at a different system. Now, that's my view in terms of what we have in front of us at the present moment. We have a stark choice in this election coming up. We either support independence parties to actually deliver independence and gain our independence from Westminster, or we continue to hold the discussions and debates about issues that the Scottish government and the Scottish Parliament can have these policies undermined by a Westminster government that is quite clearly intent on trying to damage, limit, and effectively destroy the Scottish government and the Scottish parliamentary system that we have in place. And it's about getting that message over to yes supporters, and that's why we've said we're asking, and I know there's a number of yes supporters who have fallen out of love with the SNP. What we're saying to them is, give your first vote, your constituency vote to the SNP and your list vote to Action for Independence, because once we get independence, we can have the wider debate and the policy debate about some of the issues that are going through the Parliament. But let us get independence. Let's not destroy and tear each other apart because we're going into issues that would be better decided if we were independent.
Okay, John, thanks very much for your contribution there. I appreciate you taking the time along with us tonight and to expand on your presentation earlier. I'll now move on to our second speaker of this evening, Councillor Stephanie Callaghan. And Stephanie's a councillor in the Hamilton area, Whitehill area of South Lanarkshire. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over To Steph. Hello.
Sorry, my mute wouldn't come off there. I do apologise. There's always somebody with a problem with the mute button, isn't there? Thank you, David. And thanks, John. That was really interesting too. I'll just, first of all, very quickly apologise in advance in case any of my kids, I've got 3 kids and 2 cats and a dog, so just in case we have any entrances here, I do apologise. I think the very first thing that I want to say is really that, you know, to a degree, we're all on the same side. We're all looking for independence. All our hopes and dreams for the future depend upon that. And I think that's an important point to make as we're going forward there. What I would say is that in 2016, the SNP did not get a majority. But if we hadn't had any leakage from the list, so in other words, if everybody who voted SNP on the constituency had voted SNP also on the list as well, the SNP would have had a working majority of 3, and that's not based on polls and guesstimates. That's based on the actual figures of voters back in 2016 there. And I think that would have left us in a much, much stronger position than we were working as a minority government. So obviously you've got your 2 different votes. I thought we were getting a wee rundown of the voting system before we started tonight, but we haven't. But your first vote is really about, you know, deciding who to vote for your constituency, MSP. And then your second vote is about the party that you want in government and who you want to be your first minister, as far as I'm concerned. Now, it does sound really appealing, you know, when John's talking about, you know, if we took 12% of the SNP vote, or if we took 25%, or was it 25% that you said next, you could get 2 seats there. And this idea of having an indie supermajority, it's, you know, it's quite engaging. It's quite exciting, the idea that you could have all these independent supporting MSPs in Parliament. But unfortunately, I don't think it's really that realistic. I mean, we've got 2 people here. We've got John here and we've got Julie here, who are talking about this, who have looked into the nitty-gritty of it, and still we find that they can't agree on the best way forward between them either. And I think that kind of reflects the wider idea as well, and doesn't, you know, we don't really take into account voter behaviour often enough, because the reality of voter behaviour is that the huge majority of voters, I know people who are here tonight are very interested in the subject, but the huge majority of voters won't spend that much time actually sitting down and looking at the information and studying the information and looking at the complexities of how our voting system works there to actually reach a decision on what it is that they're going to do. And I think that's a big, big problem as far as the strategy of looking to get other indie parties elected goes. What you're looking at as well is, you know, for example, for council elections, where we work by single transferable vote, when you're looking at the SNP standing more than 1 candidate in an area, we really, really struggle to get 2 candidates elected. Now, that's us going out and chapping doors and saying, you know, you vote right down the ballot paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're voting for, you're putting people in ranking order, basically. And we go down the doors, and in some areas, we ask people to vote for one of the candidates first, another one second. In another part of the ward area, we'll ask them to vote the other candidate first and the next candidate second. But that's not the reality of what voters actually do. What the voters do in the day is they go in there, and the very first candidate that's at the top of that list, they put their number 1 in that box. So that's us talking about the SNP trying to persuade its own voters to vote a certain way on polling day at the council elections. And the reality of the situation is that it just doesn't work. And it comes back to this idea that the majority of voters aren't really, really engaged in politics. The reality as well for the SNP, you know, for the membership of our branches and stuff is that, yeah, we've got people that are active. We've got a great bunch of activists in branches. However, we've also got loads of people in the SNP membership lists who are quite happy to pay their direct debit to the SNP, and they probably don't ever even open an email from us because they know that they're just going to walk in on polling day and know who they're voting for. So it doesn't really make that much difference. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to get organised. They're not really interested much further than that. So I think that's something that really has to be thought about. What we also find is that we're told a couple of different things. We're told, number one, that the SNP is going to win all the constituency seats, so it's not going to need list votes, which I don't think that's something that we can count on. But then on the other hand, what we're told is that we can't win list seats anyway. So, you know, we're not going to be successful. We can't do that, which those two things kind of work against each other to a certain degree there, if you ask me. Now, if the more we're looking at having different independence parties, we need to look at them polling above 5% for them to have a realistic chance of getting a seat there. And in Scotland, people just, you know, they don't have that trust in smaller parties. It takes smaller parties a long, long time to get established. So even the last time you had, what was it, 0.6% of the vote that you got for Solidarity, even though it was the second time that they'd come forward there. And Rise, I think Rise were 0.5% or something like that there. So that's a really difficult position to actually be in as well. As far as the Green Party goes too, then you're looking at a party there who've previously turned down the opportunity to be in coalition with the SNP and decided to go into opposition instead. And independence hasn't been their key policy. The Green policies override things like that. I mean, you look at, for example, the Queensferry crossing. The Greens didn't actually want that built there. They threatened to bring down the SNP government several times around budget time too there. They commonly vote against policies that the SNP put forward as well. So you're looking at a situation where if we're losing list votes, if we're leaking list votes, it is going to affect the number of SNP MSPs that are going to get elected in the list. It is going to have an impact there. So what I would say is that there's risks attached to it. You're talking about a situation where the SNP could lose control of like key constitutional committees. You're also looking at, you know, people say, yeah, you're going to win all the constituency seats, but at the end of the day, you just cannot predict that that is going to happen. You can't predict that that's an absolute certainty there, because polls are just not always accurate. The other thing you've got about polls as well is the last 30 days and you run up to an election, they get tighter and tighter and tighter. I think it was about 13% or something like that last time the vote dropped within the last 30 days. So it makes quite a difference. And the other thing that I would say as well is, what is it that actually really scares unionists the most? What is Boris and his gang most scared of? And it's not having a supermajority or independence MSPs. What they're really, really frightened of is the SNP getting over 50% of the vote and having a majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. That's what frightens their opposition the most, and that's exactly what we should be looking to give them. As far as I'm concerned, both votes SNP is just, it's a no-brainer. A majority government is the most powerful result that we can have. And I would say for any of us that are looking to achieve independence, it's the most powerful result that we can get there. It's our opposition's biggest fear. It's a really, really easy message to get across. And that's not something that's unimportant. It's really important. We see it as well with the unionist parties all the time. We see the propaganda that the Tories put out. The simpler the message that you've got, the quicker it's grasped and the more people hang on to it and the more they actually use it. And both votes SNP as that type of message. Section 30 as well. We hear a lot of people saying, you know, it's going to get knocked back. Just to touch on that, it's going to get knocked back. They're going to keep saying no and all the rest of it. But the reality is in 2011, when we did have a majority, we did get an independence referendum. And there's a big, big difference with the Tories saying no to the SNP, who are a minority just now, who even when you put all the indie parties together from 2016, we still weren't over the 50% mark. But if we can go over the 50% mark, they're not saying no to the SNP anymore. They're saying no to the Scottish people, to the majority people that actually voted for the SNP and voted for independence. So that's an entirely different ballgame for them there. And I trust that we will be able to move forward and we will be able to get that and grasp that. Thanks, David.
Well, thanks for that, Steph. And again, there's a few questions coming in as you were speaking there. Again, I'll go back to some of the questions that I had previously put to John. So there is an issue here about the Scottish this super max, the indie vote. Obviously, as a candidate who was standing in this election, you know, it's fair to say that SNP 1 and 2 is your position. I'll not take that. I'll allow you to answer that if that is your position or otherwise. But don't you see the attraction for some people to vote for another indie party or independent, so that if their desire is more along the lines of independence rather than party politics, isn't that an attraction there for them?
Well,
And
I'll answer first. You did ask me if I was both votes SNP. And yeah, I can confirm that I'm absolutely both votes SNP. And what I will say is, you know, that's not something that I just was told and swallowed whole. I did sit down there with the numbers as well and look at them and read as much as I could, coming from both sides of the argument. I've watched the ISP videos that come out and stuff like that as well there, because I think it's important, you know, that we're always open-minded. We make the best decisions when we have as much information in front of us as possible. And that's why I think tonight's really good, because it's a chance for people to really sit down, hear different points of view and be able to make a decision based on a decent amount of information there. When you ask about a supermajority, absolutely, I can see the attraction of it. It's just, you know, wow, if we could fill the Scottish Parliament with loads and loads of independents supporting MSPs. I mean, who on earth that wants independence isn't going to like that idea? But then when you start thinking about it a wee bit more, what you're thinking is, you know, what difference does a supermajority actually make? And then you're in a position as well where you're sitting down with parties, and I think John said earlier as well, you know, that what they'd be looking to do for their MSPs is they'd be voting with their own conscience. And that puts the SNP in really quite a difficult position when you're looking at having other independent supporting parties. If we then are in a minority, if we end up losing seats because there's leakage from the vote there, if we lose the chance of getting a majority like we did in 2016, then really, what is it a supermajority has got to offer us? What policies, etc., are we looking at that are going to come forward from those parties? When are they going to support us? When are they not? And to be quite frank, you know, it sounds to me like, you know, we're going to look a bit of a rabble if everybody's kind of arguing with each other. And don't get me wrong, I certainly see, you know, if we're looking into the future and we have an independent Scotland, then I think it's a great thing to have, you know, a big range of different parties sitting at the table for people to be really working collaboratively with each other, to have that diversity, that representation. But that's not where we're at right now. Where we're at right now is, you know, what we really need is a huge, big battering ram to be banging in Westminster's door. And the best thing we can do is get right behind the one battering ram, and that is the SNP at the moment.
Okay. Another point that's come in then here is if the SNP takes a majority in a constituency, under the D'Hondt system, is meant to be a balancing act. Therefore, if, as I've said, that there, how will you balance that if you are already in the majority in the constituency? Surely that then means that you know, you're ruled out because you have that ascendancy. If it's all yellow, as was seen in 2016, we took all the constituencies in this area, and basically we were left with nil less votes. If we go back to the previous election in 2011, you can see that transfer. So for the constituencies we won, we filled them with our list candidates. So the transpose, so that left nothing in the list bank. So how will that extra support for the SNP, if it doesn't deliver additional MSPs in our area, I mean in Borders and Highlands it does, do we need to maximise a constituency vote to get over and above that, so that is that what you're saying, the second vote we have to get 50% or 55% of the vote rather than 45, because at that point you'd then tip over into additional MSPs where normally there wouldn't be any?
Right, well, I'll answer that with numbers then quite specifically. So you're looking at 47.7% of the list vote that the SNP got in 2016, and that compares to 52.8% of the constituency vote. So we could have had 52.8% if everybody who voted in constituency had voted for the SNP in the list, and the tipping point would have been 54.2%. So that's what, just over 2% difference, and we would have won a list seat in the 2016 election. So again, that's not me talking about possibilities in polls. That's very specifically how the numbers work out. That would have been the reality of the situation for us. To win 2 list seats, we'd have won those at 60%. If we get 70%, we'd have won more seats. If we get 100%, we would still win all the seats, despite the fact that we've got the voting system that we've got just now. So the reality of the situation is that actually, the more votes you have, then the more seats that you're going to win. And the problem is the risks that there are associated with voting for other parties. So what you might find could happen this time around, because last time it was 5.1% leakage that you had there, it was a reduction of 5.1% between the constituency vote and the list vote. If that goes up a bit this time as well, what you'll find is the SNP will lose votes, the Greens will will very possibly lose some votes as well. People might decide to vote for other parties, for EFI, for ISP. And if that happens, then what's going to happen is that actually it's going to let more unionists actually win seats too. So voting for other parties in the list is certainly not without its risks in and of itself too.
Oh, sorry. A wee bit of refreshment. Well, I think that was the point I was trying to drive at. We're all aware that the polling places SNP into the range between sort of 52 and 58%, I think, which is widely varying. I think given the results that turned out in 2016, there was that sort of 6 to 8% a difference between the polls and the actual number of seats. Going back to your presentation, you said the SNP vote, and got a question here that is basically question that sort of mentality of it's the SNP vote, as in the vote and individuals, and surely they should be allowed to make their own choice rather than the dogma of a political party. So how would you counter that and positing SNP 1 and 2, you're actually being anti-democratic and trying to dictate how members and others should cast their vote?
So what I would say to that is, what I said earlier on, is what people need to do is get as much information as they possibly can and weigh that information up. The more information you have, then the better informed you are, then the better to make your own decision on it there. I'm not going to be going out there in polling day and pulling MD's arm up their back and saying you better vote SNP on the list or in the constituency or anything else. That's not what the situation is. The reality is that everybody is absolutely entitled to their opinion. I'm not going to fall out with Julie or fall out with John tomorrow because we frame this differently. We're looking at it from a different viewpoint. But to me, this is all about if you want independence, if you're looking to get a Section 30 order, because a Section 30, let's face it, that is the smoothest route to independence. It's a really nice, easy route that's laid out for us there. Much better than taking a big diversion and having to do that. So if we want the smoothest route there, I would definitely suggest to everybody, no matter what party you support, that the best way to get there is to vote SNP in the constituency, and also to vote SNP on the list vote as well, because that's what the opposition are most scared of. And if we can get a majority, and we can get over 50% of the vote, get a majority in Parliament, get that secure, then we sweep away so many of the opposition's arguments and we leave them with absolutely nowhere to go. I mean, you started seeing it in 2019 after the general election vote. I sat on Twitter and there was a tweet come out from Alison Evison, a Labour councillor who is also the chair of COSLA. And Alison Evison put out a tweet saying basically, you know, if the SNP get a majority, if a majority of the Scottish people vote for an independence referendum, then they have to be given it. And I sat and watched for ages, looking for anybody to come in and either support her or go against her, and it was radio silence. So I then moved on and started watching Monica Lennon, because I was thinking, any money, Monica will be the next one that comes in this situation here. And actually, Monica was in quite quickly there, saying exactly the same thing and backing it up. Jed Killen, who was the Labour MP for Rutherglen, who had just lost his seat, came on saying exactly the same thing. So if we get that majority there, it's not just going to be the SNP that Boris is denying. Like I said earlier, he's denying what the Scottish people are voting for. It's the Scottish people that he's saying no to, and let's face it, Scottish people don't like getting told no in a situation like that. But they'll also have people from other parties as well. You'll have people from the Labour Party too, who are not going to be able to sit back there and be completely anti-democratic when you've had a majority vote. So that's the situation, the way that I see it. Oh, you're on mute, David.
I'm trying to adjust my microphone levels. It seems I'm coming across as quite subdued, which is, anybody who knows me, I'm anything but. So thanks again for answering these questions. I'd now like to move on to our third panellist tonight. It's Julie McAnulty. Julie's standing for the ISP, former colleague and friend of myself. So as is John and as is Stephanie. So I'm in a bit of a quandary tonight. So without any further ado, Julie, would you like to make your presentation?
That's a bit. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Right, that's okay. That's good. First of all, I would like to say hi to everyone. It is a wee bit of a reunion. It's lovely to see everyone. Sort of thing. Yeah. So I was a former member of the SNP, and I was a councillor at North Lanarkshire Council for 5 years. Colette Walker, whose moniker is on my screen at the moment because I'm using her account, is the leader of the ISP. So I wanted to explain a wee bit first of all about how we came about and how we differ to AFI, because we are a bit different to them. Basically, we were a group of people who were concerned about what we perceived as a lack of progress going on with independence. We've been sitting, in terms of the independence movement, we've been sitting at over 50% yes for quite a wee while now, for quite a few polls. I believe 22, is it? Something like that. Nothing seems to be getting done with it. We have a majority in the government at the moment. I know the Greens are not officially in coalition with the SNP just now, but for all practical purposes, they're providing confidence in supply. And there was a number of routes that they could have gone down, including one which my party have been pushing since January, which is calling for May the 6th to be a plebiscite. But that is probably not going to happen now. Right, and also because it seemed to us that the SNP and the Greens together were going down some back alleys of things involving identity politics and other policies and other things that people like me, I can say this out loud now that I'm not in the SNP anymore, people like me who voted Green on the list in 2016, John, didn't think we were voting for, but got things like the hate crime bill, self-ID and other things as well. But most of all, we were concerned about progress and independence. And there's been a lot of talk tonight about facts and figures and stuff like that, and all of that's important. And as Stephanie has said, certainly everybody should be looking into that. And ISP have produced individual videos for every single region to explain exactly how things might pan out. But this isn't simply about tactics, and it isn't simply about figures. This is actually about who's willing to act. And I think this is a big question for me, and I think for most Yes supporters. Whoever gets those seats in Parliament, who is actually going to be willing to act? You could win every single one of those seats in Holyrood, but if people are not willing to act, if they're not willing to do the things necessary to obtain independence, then we might as well all go home. We might as well all not bother. Right. So that's the first point I would make about this discussion. Now, tactical voting, of course, these things aren't without the risks, but I mean, as someone who is a former councillor, I attended many by-elections, and the first by-election I saw this at, coming back home again, it was actually in the Thorneywood by-election for Stephen Bonner. And that night was the first time I saw a ballot paper coming out of a box, and it had a Conservative 1, Labour 2 on it. And at the time, we all laughed at it, and we thought it was maybe someone, you know, who wasn't quite right in the head or something. By the time we saw the 60th or 70th ballot paper coming out with that on it, Conservative 1, Labour 2, we knew exactly what was going on. Basically, the Unionists had ganged up to try and keep out the independence candidate, which was Stephen Bonner of the SNP. On that occasion, Stephen did win it. He had a good win. It was a tough ward to win in. But from that point onwards, I can tell you that the SNP have lost by-election after by-election in council elections, and it's been because of tactical voting. And it's basically because Unionists have learned how to use tactical voting and we have not. Right. And this is something, if we are going to make any progress in independence, and it's not the only thing that counts, but if we are going to make any progress, we have to learn how to do that as well. There's been a kind of notion that somehow voting for one party and, you know, voting for two parties is in some shape or form maybe, you know, a dishonourable thing to do, a sneaky thing to do, or something like that. In actual terms, it's not at all. It's a sensible thing to do if there's an overriding policy, which for all of us is independence, and that achieves that objective. At the moment, I mean, we are standing on the edge of economic ruin with Brexit, and also coronavirus is going to add a whole heap of pain on top of that. And last week, I sat and watched the hate crime bill going through, and the only thing I could ask myself was, why is this time being used to debate something like the hate crime bill, and why is it not being used to announce a plebiscite or something of that ilk? Why is that not happening? Now that's the place that ISP are coming from. We've gone, as I say, we've gone for a slightly different approach from AFI. We are a single party. We deliberately did that so that we could run light and fast in terms of getting registration, which we got last May, and we also did it because we wanted to have policies so that we could have policy positioning, so that people would understand where we actually stood in issues. No matter how much we would like this election to be a referendum, it's probably not going to happen now, because that's in the hands of the SNP and the Greens, and I don't think we're going to have a plebiscite now. And when you go into a general election, people want to know what you stand for on various different policies. And so it was very important to us to do this and to indicate to people where exactly we are, because the vast majority of voters in Scotland, and yes, are what you would call centre left. A lot of them are pro-Europe, and they have what you would call sort of left-wing views on things like land reform and benefits and stuff like that, and that is broadly where we pitch as well. So that's where we're coming from, and I appreciate what Stephanie is saying. It's no easy matter to start a party, and you're starting out small. But what I would say is somebody somewhere has got to start this process. It's got to be started, and ISP, we intend to be around for a while, so this is why we are building a party rather than trying to pull an alliance together, because we were of the opinion at the time when the Alliance were holding their meeting last year, was that there simply wasn't enough time to do that, and I think we have been proved right in that respect. So this is where we're coming from. If we can get a supermajority, the importance of the supermajority, and again this boils down to who is willing to act. The importance of the supermajority is that you can call a snap election with it. So if we didn't have a plebiscite for May the 6th, then there would be the opportunity after, I think it is 6 months, to be able to call a snap election and make that an independence referendum. And it's vitally important that we have different options. It isn't a straight route to independence. And there is more than one way to do this. It does not have to be a Section 30. What we need is a legally democratically recognised event by the international community. A plebiscite comes under that, a snap election would come under that. And we are, for reasons I don't understand, boxing ourselves into a corner with Section 30, because that is effectively handing cards over to Westminster, which they are then going to hold on to. Just to touch on a point that Stephanie made, we did get a Section 30 in 2011. The reason we got it in 2011 was at that point, the vote for yes was at 33%. And so David Cameron was quite happy to take the gamble on it. I don't think you would see them taking a gamble in 50%. Yes, we're not going to get a Section 30. And depending on how things pan out, we really need to put our heads together and come up with alternative routes. That's why we have, for example, signed the Manifesto for Indy, which David Henry from the SNP came up with recently, to try and get some cross-party consensus on a way forward with this. That's why we supported Martin Keating's action formally as a party, though Martin is with the AFI, because we see it as something that's really important in terms of where our route might go next. So that's where we're coming from in ISP. We've also, just one final point I would touch on with John. He touched on things like hate crime bill and self-ID, and I will bring them up again at the end. Now, I would much prefer not to be talking about issues like this just now. The point is, we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice because these were brought up in the Scottish Parliament and because these things are happening in real time. And the hate crime bill, which excluded sex as a protected characteristic, which has huge implications for women, has wider implications for freedom of speech, for political parties, for journalism, and in general for democracy. And it's not just something that can be left to roll until we get independence, because the way that we're moving at just now, John, and I'm sure we all kind of realise this, is that if we don't get a supermajority, it's going to be 2026. Realistically, we're going to be looking at before we even get near a referendum. So some things have to be dealt with in real time before they start to have a pernicious effect. I can see the hate crime bill being shot down probably in a couple of years in the way that Offensive Behaviour at Football Act was and the Named Persons Act was, for the same reasons. It's legislation that was maybe well intended, but in its actual effect is simply not going to work in legislation. And I think that any credible political party has to take a stance in these things just now. There's no point sitting silently on it. So we intend to be noisy. We will be friends to the SNP as far as independence goes. We will also hold their feet to the fire. We will not agree with them on everything, and we will be pushing for different routes in independence. So that is basically where we will come from. And if we're elected, we intend to make full use of it and try and start to steer Scotland in the right direction towards independence.
Oh, thanks for that, Julie. And again, I'll put a few questions to you that have come in, and specifically that blend two together that sort of touched on that last part of your presentation. Mm-hmm. And that was how do you contend with claims that you are splitting the indie vote, and secondly, that claims that you're anti-SNP and settling old scores?
Right. So sorry, give me the first question again, David. Sorry.
The first part is, how do you contend with claims that the ISPs actually look to split the indie vote?
Well, the ISP have committed to being a list party, so I don't see that that's really a valid argument. As has been, I'm not going to go into all the details that the others went into in terms of figures and stuff, but the way de Hont is a rigged playground. Basically, it was deliberately rigged to prevent an independence majority. It was done so that nobody would have a majority, and so that we would spend endless time arguing with each other so that we wouldn't bother Westminster. And we need to think of ways around it, and this is what we're trying to do. Now, maybe this is something we could have done with starting 2 years ago or something, but somebody's got to start this process somewhere. So I don't accept that. Right, the second question. Sorry, David, I should have written them down as we went.
And the second part, Julie, was how do you deal with claims that you're anti-SNP and that basically you're out, not just yourself, but it's about settling old scores.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
Because it's disaffected SNP members.
Well, I mean, every
somebody's put it up, so I have to ask these questions.
It's fine. It's a perfectly valid question, David, and I'm perfectly relaxed answering it. I mean, what I would say is that all new movements are born out of dissatisfaction with the old. That is just the natural order of things, and I am quite relaxed about the fact that I had extreme concerns about what was going on in this area with the SNP. I was concerned about internal governance going on, and that, as we know, has been a huge issue for the SNP in the past few months. And that was something that all of us saw at large here in this area. In terms of being anti-SNP, I'm not. Stephanie is someone who personally I am friends with and who I would like to see do well. And we all understand that at the moment the SNP is the biggest party, and that the SNP is needed, although we feel that the SNP is not sufficient to take independence forward. There is a danger in putting all your hopes and dreams in one party and putting all your hopes and dreams in one approach. And that's something that I think that has been proved time and again in politics. If you think back to 2003, we had a much wider range of MSPs from different parties. There was 6 SSP, there were Greens, there was John Swinburne, there was on the constituency, there was likes of Jean Turner and Dennis Canavan. There's room for us all there. And the thing about having diversity is that we all keep each other honest. And no matter how well intentioned you are when you start off, if you have the whole field to yourself, you get complacent. It's just human nature. It's the way of things. So we feel that this is maybe what's going on just now. This is a recalibration of the Yes movement. Touching on a couple of points that John made, probably about 40% of Labour voters are probably also pro-independence. There's approximately 500,000 Yes voters that didn't vote for an indie party in 2016. If you compare the referendum result of Yes voters with the actual number of people who voted for Yes parties, probably a lot of those lost voters are in the Labour Party, and for whatever reason, the SNP and the Greens are not appealing to them. And the chances are that maybe a party like us could maybe have that appeal. So there's everything to play for. And in terms of tactics, again, the nearly 1 million votes, over 1 million votes, I was thinking of 2011, Stephanie, that were virtually wasted on the SNP the last time. If those get translated, if even a small amount of those get translated to votes for regional list parties, then we could clear out the unionists. Machiavelli has a saying, and I've used this several times in what I've said, which is that if you want to rule a people, you go and sit amongst them. Right. Well, we've got the unionists sitting amongst us now. They're sitting amongst us in Holyrood, and it's not just the MSPs. It's a whole structure that's behind them of offices, of the access to government networks, of the money that they get, and everything. And if we are going to have any chance of independence, we have to break that network down, and we have to find a way around the haunt. It's what we have to do. And that's my view on it.
Okay, thanks again, Julie. I'll finish up with one last question, which is it the ISP's opinion or otherwise that a Section 30 order is required in order to have either a plebiscite or another referendum? No,
it's not. That's their opinion, and it's not just their opinion. It's the opinion of a lot of people. It's not. We don't need that for a referendum. Can I just say something about Brexit? Brexit was an advisory referendum. Okay, Brexit didn't need to be acted on, but it was acted on. Okay, and I mean that's just something to bear in mind with all of this. Okay, and I mean if the boot were on the other foot, do you think England would have asked Scotland's permission? Well, they didn't ask her permission. Would have asked Scotland's permission for a referendum? Of course not. Scotland's a nation. It's not a region. This is not. We're not Catalonia. We are a nation in a union with another nation. That is the situation that we're in. We don't need to ask anyone's permission to do this, and this is the mentality that we need to get out of. We need to stop boxing ourselves in. So plebiscite is legally recognised, and a snap election would be legally recognised. That is our view on it.
Okay, I'll leave it there, and we'll move on to the next round. There has been a wee sort of request. So the next section, rather than open you up to other questions from the audience, is I'll hold the jackets, and we can have a wee bit of a bun fight here. So obviously, we'll go probably back to John. John, would you like to ask questions of any of our other two guests tonight on what you've heard on their presentations?
Thanks, David. The only thing, I think the points that have been made, particularly by Julie, in terms of GRA and the hate crime legislation, and Julie's right, hate crime legislation was overturned. And this is a question really to Stephanie. The problem that you get with majority governments, and the problem that I, as a member of a majority government, SNP government, in 2011 to 2014, was there's a lot of legislation that was put through because the SNP had a majority, but the whipping system for the SNP MSPs was quite firm there was very little dissension allowed. So the hate crime legislation was being pushed through by the SNP, despite the fact the opposition from within the parliament. And do you think that having a majority SNP government brings about better legislation? Because the examples we've got seem to not support that. That seems to be the leadership push forward legislation that isn't wholly acceptable or supported in the country or within the parliament. But do you not see that having that majority and the fact that members can't dissent from within the parliament leads to bad legislation?
Thanks, John. Yep, an interesting question, certainly. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. You know, the fact that, you know, if you've got a majority, the MPs, MSPs are being whips, then yeah, certainly there are going to be pieces of legislation that are pushed through. However, you know, people too don't always obey the whip. You'll find, for example, even Linda Fabiani has voted against the whip at a point in time too there. So as well as being, you know, responsible to the wider party, our own constituencies, you still have to have that moral compass, I think, as well. You know, you still have to have principles that you're absolutely prepared to stand by. And although certainly, as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't be looking to go against the whip, then clearly we all have our red lines, and there are situations where we would do that. For example, if the SNP suddenly decided to keep Trident in Scotland, then there's absolutely no way in this world probably that they're going to get any of their MSPs voting for it. But you did mention there as well about the hate crime bill and about the SNP pushing that through. That is not the situation that happened. The SNP are a minority. That passed by quite a big majority. Now, what we had Joanne Lamont, who did actually go against her party on it. She brought forward her amendment, but the reason that the Labour Party actually decided to back the hate crime bill was the fact that that you would have had to have come away, because there was a lot of good stuff in it. They would have it would have taken much longer if we'd come away from the hate crime bill completely to look at the situation with women than to actually take the hate crime bill, put it through at this point in time to bring those benefits and bring together the legislation that works across all the different inequality groups there. The working group had already been set up. They were happy with who was going to be running that and organising it. And that is something that's going to happen, that's going to make sure things happen more quickly rather than it actually causing a longer delay. So it wasn't about the SNP pushing it through. It was something that was voted through by quite a majority.
Can I come in there?
Certainly.
Right, okay. Sex was left out of all the protected characteristics, and it's a glaring omission. It's a glaring omission because, I mean, obviously, speaking as a woman, we make up more than half the population, and we don't understand why it was left out. And I take your point that Labour voted with it, which concerns us as well, because this seems to be, for us, a problem across both parties. But the point is that the SNP led this bill. It could have been part. And again, going back to the wider issue about what's actually important, I wish that the SNP had been putting as much back into pushing things on independence as they have in this. I mean, we were told that there was no parliamentary time for these things, that coronavirus was taking up all their time, and then we've had this in at the death. And while there's been all kinds of other things going on as well, so it's not something I really accept. This is something that should have been considered from the start. And we know that from the start that there were questions raised, particularly about Joanne Lamont's amendment, that was raised at committee level originally, and it was ignored, and it was only when it was finally brought to the floor at the point of doom and a big fuss was made about it, including our party. We kicked up a huge fuss online about it, that the SNP finally abstained on it. I'm very, very worried about the way that things are going for women just now, and I speak as someone, I mean, when I was at council, the equal pay was going through. And that impressed me more than anything, Stephanie. Again, what a twisted playground that women live in. It wasn't easy being a woman up at the council. I mean, at that point, I think there was 70 councillors and only 13 of us were women. It wasn't an easy gig at all. And so I'm concerned about, you know, first of all, where this is going in terms of women, and secondly, what it actually means why these routes have been going down, when to my mind there's far more important things when we are on, and I keep saying this, we're on the edge of economic ruin. Why parliamentary time would be devoted to something like that, I don't get it, and I don't like it.
Well, what I would say to that, Julie, is that this all kind of kicked off back in 2017. So that's back where it started there, which was before we were having COVID and all the rest of it coming in there. Now, I completely agree with you. You know, women are more than 50% of the population in this country, and we need to have a seat at the table. There are all sorts of barriers to women coming into government, and without us sitting at the table with the best will in the world, that's not something that men can resolve, because women offer a different perspective. Now, certainly, I've noticed a massive difference. I was first elected in opposition to South Lanarkshire Council in a by-election in January 2016, 2015, 2016. I'm losing track now. And at that point in time, well, I was seen to be really young. For a start, they were saying, "Oh, you could maybe be a new youth officer because you're really young," and I'm going, I'm like in my late 40s with 3 kids, so lacking a bit of diversity there. But at that point in time as well, you know, you were looking at mainly retired white men who were at council. Now, don't get me wrong, in 2017, we still have plenty of retired white men, and I have nothing against them at all. But what you need is a bit more diversity. Diverse teams are the best teams. They have more perspectives. They make the best decisions there. There's tons of evidence to tell you that there. But in 2017, there were a lot more women were elected. And actually, it's really changed the conversations at the table. It's made a massive impact, and all the men in our group, as well as the women, would tell you exactly that. So it makes a really, really big difference there. So I'm all for that. Without sitting at the table, you know, we can't make those changes that make it easier for women to come forward and come into government. What I would say about the hate crime bill, yeah, it was an SNP-led bill, and be quite honest with you, you know, it would have been better if we had incorporated sex and incorporated women in it from the outset as well. I don't disagree with that there, but we are where we are, and what you were looking at was a situation as well, you know, where different agencies had asked to be involved in the consultation process, etc. there as well. And you had people like Women's Aid and Engender. Women's Aid submitted their report in June 2020, I think it was. So you had these people coming forward and saying, actually, there's problems with this. It's actually something that, you know, depending on whether or not it's applied, it might actually be used by those who've committed offences to perhaps suggest that their offence isn't as bad as the next offence, and that actually it could be used in court to actually undermine prosecutions. So there was a lot of that type of information too been taken into account there. That was information coming from Women's Aid and coming from Engender and people like that. So, you know, don't get me wrong, I don't think it is ideal that we have to wait to bring the women's part into it there, but what I do think is, you know, that's not a part of the legislation that can be rushed. I think, considering where we are, it's definitely a better idea to really sit down and examine that in detail and make sure that we get it right, because, as I'm sure you would agree yourself, the devil is always in the detail as far as these things are concerned. And if it's going to create risks that we don't have to have there, then better that we go away and that we look at it and we bring it in at a later point in time.
It is something that could have been parked until something that could have been parked until after the election. It didn't need to be passed. It could have been parked, and we could have concentrated on things like how are we going to get ourselves out of the situation that we're facing with Brexit and COVID just now. That's what we should have been focusing on, independence. And I don't know what's going on with the SNP decision making, but that has been my concern.
I think as well, though, you know, when you've committed to programmes of government, etc., there as well, then to a degree, you have to be carrying on the general business of government as well, you know, just the same way as, you know, at council we've still had to deliver all the kind of essential services. We've still gone forward with changes in all different resources and things as well, despite the fact that we're also dealing with a lot of extra measures around COVID and around delivering medicines and getting food out to people and all the rest of it there too. The day-to-day stuff still has to keep going forward, I suppose.
But hate crime wasn't day to day. Anyway.
Okay, if that's all the questions from our panelists tonight.
David, I was wanting to ask a wee kind of question as well.
Okay, this was the time for doing it, Stephanie. So
yeah, well, you didn't invite me. I thought we were kind of still in John's turn. I thought John was going to get another chance to finish off, and you were going to get round us all.
Right, okay, no, I'll do that, John. Is there anything else you'd like to contribute at this moment?
Is it a contribution or a question, David?
I'll contribute to a question.
Stephanie's got a question she wants to ask.
No, carry on, John. Question or contribution?
No, as I said, if Stephanie's question might be an interesting question that we might all want to answer. So
the round robin type affair here is that you will get to come in and comment on particular items that each other brings up. So if you've no more questions to ask,
no more questions to ask.
Okay, we'll move on. Right, Stephanie, if you'd like to come ahead with your question, and then our other panelists can give you answers to that.
Right.
Over to you.
Okay. I wanted to ask as well, you know, quite a few times there when Julie was speaking, she was saying, you know, about who it is that's willing to act. Now, I think it's important to point out, you know, that the SNP have been a minority government at this point in time there. We've not had the political legitimacy to force a lot of the issues forward that we would like to there. Particularly when you're looking at right across the board, even if you're taking into account the Greens, the other support for independence, we still fall above that 50% kind of popular mandate idea there too. Spoke about the Section 32 not being the only route to independence, and I don't actually disagree with that, but I would say it is the best route, it's the easiest path, it's the easiest way to get there. And I would say the opposite of boxing ourselves in. I think basically what's happening as far as the Section 30 is concerned is that more and more and more we're pushing the opposition parties right and backing them right into a corner and boxing them in and not leaving them an out route. And if we take the focus off that and move to starting to focus on different things, starting to focus on having plebiscites, etc. as well, I think we're really basically letting them off the hook with it there. As well, you know, when we talked about, there seems to be this idea as well that the SNP haven't really done much as far as independence is concerned since 2016, but you're looking at, you know, they've passed the referendum bill. Nicola Sturgeon had actually announced a referendum as well would be held in 2020 before COVID came along and just ruined everybody's plans for absolutely everything that we thought we wanted to do there. The referendum question itself has actually been agreed and it was sent off for testing. The Scottish Parliament of the ultimate say in the question, and the conduct to the referendum franchise, the voting franchise there. And in August 2020, you know, they said it's going to be in our next election manifesto there. So I think as far as, you know, who's willing to act, I would say all of us are willing to act. I wouldn't question anyone here's intention to act and do everything that we can to get a referendum through here. And in Central Region, like I'd said earlier on, you know, we're looking at 4.2%. Sorry, 4.2%, 54.2% would have got us a list seat the last time. You know, that's a difference of 2.4% in the vote, an increase of 2.4% in the SNP constituency vote, if that was also voted in the list there, would be enough to win a list seat for the SNP, rather than getting right up to 5% of the vote for other parties. So really, my question to you is, you know, what's the wasted votes? Are we wasting votes voting for the SNP, or are we actually wasting votes voting for smaller parties when it would take votes away from the SNP and Greens and could let let the Conservatives and Labour in by the back door.
Right, I'll have a pop at this one first, David. There's no wasted votes if people vote for indie parties in the list. You've talked about, Stephanie, 54.5% would need to be the total vote the SNP would get in the list to get one extra seat. And the figures I gave you earlier is 12% of that vote going to small indie party would give you 1, 25% of that SNP vote would give you 2, and 50% of that vote would potentially give you 3 candidates getting elected. So for your 1 candidate, pro-independence candidate, SNP member, you could potentially get 3 members elected for that. And if you repeated that throughout the country, in 2016, the SNP picked up 4 list seats. And if you look at the total number of votes that were cast on the list for the SNP in 2016, then you were at a position where it was over 900,000 votes. And the return for the SNP was 4 list seats. And the reality is that, no, if you switch some of that vote, you'd get a better return by voting for smaller indie parties on the list. And that's why we're saying voting for Action for Independence would give you more vote return for independence supporting MSPs than you would get for voting for the additional members you'd get in the list. And going back to the polls, the last 22 polls have shown that the SNP are going to pick up anywhere between 68 and 71 seats in the constituencies. That means that the SNP and the SNP, and at the present moment, we're actually not seeing that massive upsurge for the SNP in the list. And I think Julie gave a good example of that. And I saw it myself in 2017, where you had a situation where I saw it in council elections where Labour voters were voting for Conservatives second. Julie saw it, in terms of where the Thorneywood by-election. And the difficulty is, unless we can galvanise the independence vote, and we've got to make the distinction between a vote for the SNP and a vote for independence. And what we're offering is the opportunity for people on the list to vote for independence. We're not getting a plebiscite because the SNP wouldn't call for the election a plebiscite. But if we call it, we'll continue to demand that the list vote is a vote for independence. And if we can get the Labour voters that support independence to vote on the list, then we actually continue, that won't vote for the SNP on the list, we can actually continue to raise the vote and we get more MSPs returned supporting independence than we would get with a handful of SNP MSPs on the list. So it's about looking at the overall numbers and saying, would you rather have 2 or 3 SNP MSPs on the list, or would you rather see 16, 24 pro-independence supporting MSPs on the list? And
can I just say, to be quite honest with you, if it's the difference between an SNP getting a majority and not, I would rather see a smaller number of SNP MSPs on the list, and I can say that I need to be really honest about that. But my real question to you is, how are you going to persuade? Let's look at the 25% figure, because 12% gets you the same as an extra 2.4% on the SNP vote, which is going to be a lot easier to achieve, I would suggest. So let's look at the 25% figure that would get you a couple of list seats there. How on earth are you going to actually engage with those voters and go against voter behaviour and persuade 25% of people to actually vote on the list like that? I just cannot see it being something you can persuade people to do.
Stephanie, in the last 20 years, we have seen voter shift in the last 20 years. 22 years ago, the Scottish Parliament was elected. The SNP ended up with, I think it was 35 MSPs in 1999, and the majority of them were on the list. And what we've seen gradually over election, the number of SNP MSPs elected. In 2007, we had 47 MSPs, SNP MSPs, a minority SNP government. And then in 2011, we had 68 SNP MSPs elected. So we have seen voters shifting in the last 22 years. Voters are getting more astute in terms of how they're casting votes, and they will vote for something that they think will bring about change, not bring about the same government in power just to retain a government in power. What we're offering is an opportunity to push for independence as early as possible, not to have another 5 years of an SNP government. It's not about electing a government for another 5 years. It's about pushing for independence as early as possible. And I think that's what the ISP are saying, and certainly what Action for Independence are saying, is if we're elected, we will be pushing for independence at the earliest possible opportunity. That's why we've got Martin Keating's on board, the person who's been behind the Section 30 legal challenge in Scotland. Martin's joined Action for Independence because he genuinely believes Scotland needs independence. As I said, not in 5 years' time, not in 10 years' time. We need it within the earliest possible opportunity to actually ensure that all the powers of a nation rest within that nation, not to be demanded or be controlled or have the purse strings taken away from us by another country. And that's what we're offering at the present moment, is that opportunity to deliver independence at the earliest possible juncture, rather than waiting 5 years, 10 years, or looking for an 11-point plan for independence. It's about independence, I would argue, and that's the priority, and it should be the priority for the SNP, and it should be the priority for every independence supporter in Scotland to achieve independence as the earliest possible point in the future of Scotland.
Can I have another wee question there? Just kind of on what you're saying there, John, as well. You said earlier on, about the Electoral Commission having an issue with you calling yourself Alliance.
Yep. And
you seem to imply there that it'd be a good idea for the SNP to actually be supporting the idea that people who are voting for them in the constituency vote for another independence party on the list, for yourselves on the list there. I can't imagine that would be something that the Electoral Commission would be too happy about, and if it was something that could be gotten away with, I think what we'd find is that our opposition would kind of do exactly the same type of thing, and then I think we end up in a position like South Korea, who have got a proportional system, and basically you got a branch off from one of the big parties there, branched off so that they could up their number of seats, and the other big party did exactly the same. And what ended up happening actually was that all the smaller parties get pushed out absolutely completely, and you ended up with something that was totally undemocratic. So that's something that I would be kind of quite concerned about, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
In relation to your point about the SNP, I don't expect the SNP leadership to be advocating for voting for another party in the list. I don't see it. And quite clearly, both votes SNP, they claim worked for them in 2016. As far as they're concerned, both votes SNP will work for them in 2021. What I'm saying is, to the yes and independence-minded voters on the list, think about what your vote is being used for, and think about the best way to use that vote. And the best way we would argue to use that vote is to vote for a pro-indie smaller party such as Action for Independence, to return more MSPs than you would do by getting that 54% of voters, or that trying to reach that target of 54%. Now, I've heard SNP members arguing about voter leakage in relation to and you argued it yourself earlier tonight about the voter leakage from the constituency to the list. And what you've got to remember is some of that voter leakage is because the Greens didn't field, there was only one constituency. The Greens fielded a candidate in 2016, and I know for a fact that's the situation. So you got people who voted SNP in the constituency, who then transferred, there was something like 4.5% of that vote over to the Greens. They then transferred 0.6% to the SSP, Solidarity, and to other smaller parties. So it's about galvanising that vote. That's where some of your voter leakage came from. And what I'm saying to you is people voting tactically, and people do now vote tactically. If they're voting tactically and they want to see independence being achieved, then one of the ways to do that is vote for the smaller indie parties on the list and get more pro-indie MSPs sitting in the Parliament that sends a clear message to Westminster, and it sends a clear message to unionist parties, because by voting, as you said, you get one extra SNP, MSP if you get over 54% of the vote. But that means you still get 3 Tories and potentially 3 Labour MSPs sitting on the list. Whereas if you vote for smaller indie parties, then what you do is you start removing some of these pro-unionist parties from the list, and you create a parliament that sees, because as I said earlier, I was hoping that we'd have seen the death of the Tories in Scotland, but in central Scotland, from 1 MSP in 2011 to 3 MSPs in 2016, clearly shows we have to do something to take those unionist parties out of the equation and not see them being returned on the list, and get pro-indie supporters and advocates on the list so they can actually fight for and get independence.
Julie, would you like to come in on that?
I think I just want to. I don't really have any questions. I think we have covered a lot of it, David. But I would just like to reiterate: we can't put all our hopes and dreams in one party or one person. They always fail you. Parties wax and wane. People wax and wane. But we've all got a part to play in this. The SNP, Action for Indie, ISP. We have to travel this route together if we're going to be successful in this, and that's what we need to do. And voters need to spread their votes and spread their bets and vote intelligently for us to get there. So that's what I would say. At the end of the day, we're on this route together. And again, it's nice to see you all.
Okay, that rounds up the questioning of each other. If you don't mind, we've still got about 6 or 7 questions outstanding. So if it could be as brief as possible. And again, I would like to thank those who've joined us, joined in on Facebook tonight. And again, a big thank you to Paul McCartney and Linda Beard for organising this meeting tonight. So with that, I'll start off with Julie, since you spoke the last time. Question is, and the question will be open to everybody, but I'll take it in reverse order. So Julie, then Steph, then John. First question: has the SNP leadership frustrated the indie movement?
I think that's something for everyone, for everyone to make their own individual judgment on. From where we're standing, I mean, we would have expected in terms of preparation for a vote in independence, we would have expected certain things to have been getting put in place. And we simply haven't seen that. I'm talking about things like funds, like setting up networks. I remember the run up to the 2014 referendum, and I remember meeting in 2012. I think it was at Airdrie Stadium, if I remember correctly, John, and we were all there, and we were all planning what we were going to do and putting down our skills. There was a huge fundraising thing. I can't see any of that happening just now. I asked myself why the Scott government allowed itself to appear as a respondent against Martin Keatings in the action for Section 30, which I think was a bad move. And the SNP at the moment, I think, is in a state of flux. I don't think it's particularly healthy just now. I hope that at the end of this process, I hope it will be healthier, because it is not good for independence if things are going wrong within the SNP. But I think that maybe there needs to be a reassessment of the SNP's internal governments and take it from there.
Okay, over to you now, Steph.
Oh, my answer on the same question, just give me a wee reminder then, please.
Yes. Has the SNP leadership frustrated the independence movement?
I think there are always going to be people who are that you're going to find that with to a certain degree there. I think as well, Nicola Sturgeon's got an incredibly difficult job to do. I think the reality of the situation that we have here is, and I'm talking about before COVID and stuff here as well, obviously it's a whole new ball game since that happened, but I think, you know, she's always been walking that tightrope, wherein you've got independent supporters on one side, and on the other side you've got people who voted no at the last referendum there. And I think in reality, you know, you have to be thinking about keeping those people with you, the people that voted no the last time, the people who when they looked at the data and stuff, you know, were the people who were less likely to want change, who tended to be more reserved, who tended to prefer the status quo. And these are the people that we have to win over if we're going to have independence. So on one side of the equation, you're going to have yes supporters going, go faster, go harder, go stronger. On the other situation, on the other side of the situation, if you do that, then you're going to have people that get spooked and that are thinking, oh no, you know, this is just a bit too much and all the rest of it there. And I think the reality is that you know, when the starting gun does fire for the next independence referendum, and I think it will be firing very soon indeed. If that gun fires, then I think you're in a situation where, yeah, you know, there's a bit of division across the independence movement, across the yes movement just now. You see lots of bickering with each other, and that's not just about the SNP, that's just kind of more widely, more generally speaking. But as soon as that's called, I see everyone pulling really, really tightly together and absolutely going for it. People aren't going to decide, you know, I'm not voting for independence because Nicola Sturgeon or the leadership of the SNP has annoyed them. I really don't see that happening, because once you've sat down and you've looked at the facts, you can't unlearn what you now know. You can't unlearn the benefits of independence. We know them. They're in your heart and soul, and that's the way that you look at moving forward there. So, I mean, Julie said, you know, you can't put all your hopes and your dreams in one party. At this point in time, I would look at it from an opposite viewpoint. I would say it's about solidarity. It's about standing together. And the SNP is the best vehicle that we have for independence. We all need to get behind it. And again, I'll use that same analogy. Get behind a big battering ram and start banging down Westminster's door and give them absolutely nowhere to go, and make sure that we get our next referendum and that we vote yes.
David, in terms of the question, I think the problem within the SNP is the frustration that many of the SNP members have at the lack of direction in terms of, you know, the independence campaign. And there seems to be more of a desire to govern than to actually push the agenda on independence. And as I said, I'm picking that up from the frustration of SNP members that they feel they've been let down. And I think you've got to remember the SNP membership aren't the majority of the Yes movement. The Yes movement is much larger than just the SNP. And the wider Yes movement, if you look at the number of Yes groups that exist throughout Scotland, and you look at the number of campaigners that are involved in the Yes campaign that aren't SNP members, then there is frustration that the SNP, as that battering ram, has not been swinging the battering ram hard enough to actually galvanise the movement. As Julie said, in 2011, is when there was a majority SNP government in Scotland. That's when it really ramped up. 2012 was just the, starting to get the localised campaigns. Every MSP, every SNP MSP in 2011 that was elected that year had at the front of their mind that we needed a referendum and we wanted a referendum delivered. And we got the referendum delivered, but there's 2 years of solid work, solid graft by all the MSPs, by the party members and those out with the party to actually campaign for and push for that referendum. And the figures were given earlier, Julie said it, 33% at the start of that process, where that was the polls for the support of independence. By the end of that referendum, on the 18th of September, there was 45% of the population voted for independence.
We were robbed.
Can I just come back on that, John, as well there? I think we're at a different starting point. I'm not looking at a referendum happening 2 years down the line. I'm looking for it an awful lot sooner. This year, most hopefully.
But that's the frustration, Stephanie. There is
but what I wanted to say, John, though, is that I think, you said about, that they're annoyed that there hasn't been the campaigning and stuff. At the end of the day, there hasn't been any campaigning for anything at all. We've had COVID hit us. We did look at, there was the announcement that there was going to be a referendum. And then all of a sudden we have to pull back from absolutely everything. I mean, this election campaign, for example, for Holyrood, I've not put a single leaflet through a door. I've not knocked a single door. I've not stood in a single street stall. We've just basically not been able to campaign. So I think it's maybe a wee bit unfair to say, that nothing at all has been happening when we're at a point in time where it's very, very, very difficult to actually make things happen.
Definitely the point I made, and COVID has only been with us for a year. This is us now coming up to the anniversary of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to the 2014 referendum, there was 3 years of solid preparation and work being carried out before that referendum was carried out. So even if you take it back to March last year, you've got to ask yourself, what work had the SNP done, apart from trying to get a referendum bill through the Parliament, what work had been done to build up the forces, to build up the momentum, to get the troops in place to go and fight a referendum, if you said the referendum that would have taken place in 2020. And I think you're agreeing with Julie and myself in terms of when we want a referendum. As I said earlier, it's not 5 years' time, it's not 4 years' time. We want a referendum conducted as soon as you get a majority of pro-Indie MSPs elected into the Parliament in May. We want a referendum shortly after that, not, as I said, several years down the road. We want it almost immediately, because there were us in the smaller parties were saying use the 6th of May as a plebiscite. Use it as a plebiscite to say if you get a majority in the constituencies and a majority in the list, then that is the mandate to push for independence. And as Julie said earlier, it would have been internationally recognised by every other nation that election was a plebiscite, and that was the wishes of the Scottish people to have independence. And Westminster would not have been able to stand up against that, because we would have had the support of other nations, especially many of the European nations would have welcomed that plebiscite taking place and welcomed us back. And for those who want to be back in Europe, would have welcomed us back in Europe.
John, can I just say though, you know, there's this idea that, you know, the SNP have been sitting their laurels and not really doing anything. Now, I didn't join the SNP. I was a Labour voter for decades. The independence referendum woke me up. I thought I was going to vote no, but I thought, you know, this is important. I need to kind of look at the information a wee bit and have a wee glance at it there. And I ended up studying it for months and months on end, went and joined the Yes movement, then ended up campaigning for a full year, almost every single night out knocking doors there, because I just thought, you know, I want a better future for my kids. We deserve a better, fairer, more equal Scotland, and there's an opportunity to have that, and I need to do everything I can to get it. But I think it's quite unfair to act as if the SNP have been resting their laurels and not really doing much. We have been absolutely battling. We've had elections, we've had 5 elections since the last election. You know, it's just been absolutely constant. It's been grueling and it's been really, really hard work. So, you know, there's that, yeah, there's the wider Yes movement, and that's what I joined there as well. And already you're seeing them really starting to build things up and ramp things up now as well. So I think that's something that's shared across the whole movement, and it's not about the SNP necessarily getting all these things in place. I don't think it's really just down to them and their responsibility, but absolutely. And if it gives anybody any confidence, I sit in vetting panels as well, so I did a lot of vetting as well in the run up to this election as well, and the appetite for independence, I can assure you, is very, 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 very strong indeed.
Okay, I'll come in at that and I'll pass it over to Julie, because unbeknownst to yourself, Steph, you wandered in to the next question, which was going to be
Apologies.
when do the SNP intend to hold the referendum? Is it 2021, as Ian Blackwood said, or will it be closer to 2026? So I think in that wee discussion there, we got your opinion and John's. So over to yourself, Julie, on this.
I think it's going to be 2026, unless we get a supermajority. That's my view on it. I don't see, but we're in a bad spot here just now. You know, if we'd had a plebiscite for May the 6th, we could have kicked the ball. And the ball's at our feet just now. As I say, we're over 50%. And my fear is that over the next couple of years, what's going to happen as the effects of Brexit kick in is that we're going to see people turn in on themselves and see the yes vote drop, and then there will be another reason not to have a referendum. That's my kind of gut feeling on it. Unless something changes within the SNP leadership and within the internal governments, which to my view is in chaos at the moment, it's not going to happen, because it simply isn't the groundwork and preparation. It's not just about setting a date. It's about what you have to do with the Electoral Commission. It's about having funding. It's about other things. And someone has to be brave at some point. And at the moment, I just can't see that coming from the SNP, and that's where I'm sitting.
Julie, can I just ask you, you're saying about, you know, making it a plebiscite, and it's something that John has said as well. And the question that always kind of comes to me is, you know, what is this big difference then between, you know, going for a plebiscite or going for a Section 30? Why is Boris and everybody else going to go along with a plebiscite and say, yeah, okay then, but they're going to say no to a Section 30? I don't really see. I don't see why that has a better chance of success than going for a Section 30, which is the kind of agreed route that meets all the legitimate things, that meets all the international law just now, that we know we've already taken. The last time that we managed to get a majority in the Scottish Parliament, we've already done that there.
No, you don't need a Section 30. It was just one route of many that we could have taken, Stephanie. But the point is that we could declare on the basis of a May election, if everyone agreed, we could declare that was the result. If there's a majority of independents supporting MSPs at the end of that, then we could declare independence and take it to the international court sort of thing. That's what we could do. It's a step further forward in the process, instead of perpetually asking for a Section 30 order and not even getting the process started. That's the point. It's about momentum, Stephanie, and that's the difference.
The other
And it's
thing
something
is-
we can do without
declaring-
permission.
So it's about
It's-
declaring independence after May's
Yeah.
election for you,
Yeah.
rather than a referendum.
No,
The-
the election would be the referendum. That's the difference.
the plebiscite would be internationally recognised because it would take it to the international courts, and other nations would accept and recognise the plebiscite. A Section 30, the difficulty with a Section 30, Stephanie, is you rely on Westminster granting that at the present moment. That's why Martin Keatings is taking the legal action that he's taken to try and change at the present moment, Westminster has control over the Section 30. The difficulty we're now facing is over the next 5 years, under a Conservative controlled Westminster, we potentially see the powers of the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament being stripped back.
Yeah.
And that is a danger that we've got. We got told when Brexit took place that there would be more powers transferred to the Scottish Government and to the Scottish Parliament. And what's happened is less powers and have been transferred. And in fact, powers have been taken away from the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government. So the danger is we rely on a Westminster, Conservative-controlled Westminster government granting a Section 30 order because they control the legislation that controls the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government. And if they strip that back and say no, then we're at the mercy. And as Julie said earlier, she gave the percentage. When David Cameron granted the last Section 30 order, we were sitting on 33% support for independence. When you're sitting at 50% plus for independence, do you think Boris Johnson, with always words that he's mentioned about Scotland and about considering an independence referendum, is going to grant a Section 30 order when he's got the support of his backbenches and the Labour Party in Westminster that will oppose granting a Section 30 order for the Scottish Government?
So John, what I would say to that is, it seems to me like you're also relying on Boris Johnson accepting then the result of a plebiscite election.
No,
You're relying him. No,
you don't need
can I-
Boris
can I
Johnson
finish,
to
John?
accept it.
Can I finish there?
Stephanie, Stephanie.
John, can I finish my?
Because I think the situation where we're at, and I appreciate I think we were only supposed to go to 9:30, but with any luck we can continue on. But I think the point, the constitutional point, because that's where we're straying into now, is the fact that the legalistic move by the leadership of the SNP and continued down requiring the Section 30 was basically to it was an accommodation built into the Scotland Act, which set up the Scottish Parliament. But until 1999, the position of the Scottish Parliament and a lot of members like herself was, and that great lady that Margaret Thatcher never was, it was of her opinion that Scotland would become independent when the Scots elected the majority of MPs to Westminster, and that was the rule then, and that avenue hasn't been pursued, and that's why we've got the case with Michael Keating and that going forward, because there is more than one way to independence that's recognised, internationally, and also by the United Nations. The whole thing about the last referendum was it didn't actually fit in with the United Nations definition of independence, in that the people who are seeking to become independent, they should do so, and there should be no interference from the other power. But as we've seen, the campaign Better Together was basically funded by Westminster. Westminster put a lot of effort in there. So if you had been doing a referendum on the basis of the United Nations, I think it's Article 4, Westminster wouldn't have been able to play a part. So again, it moves us on and hopefully I can get more concise answers to these.
David, can I just be really clear as well? There seems to be a perception that I'm saying Section 30 is the only way, and I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that it lets them off the hook just now. What we need to do is push them, and if they're going to refuse a Section 30, then I completely accept. We need to take a different route, but we need to keep them in that corner and force them to either accept it and bring it on, or to actually turn it down against the democratic vote of the Scottish people. And I think the danger too that John's mentioning, he's talking about dangers. I think having a plebiscite referendum at this election when nobody's able to go out and campaign or do anything around about it there, and then being in a decision where maybe even if you get a slight majority, if we're lucky and got a slight majority and we manage to achieve over 50% of that vote, you're still looking at a huge big chunk of people who will not be happy with us declaring independence, a huge number of Scottish people. And where does that take us as well? Where does that take us down the line? That is something for me that is worrying. We need to take people with us. We need to be on the same road, and we need to move forward together.
I think to be clear and clarified, I don't want to put words in John's mouth, but I don't think he's actually using that as a sort of a UDI type declaration. Yeah, I think what he's on about is a plebiscite, a super max return on the 6th of May would give a plebiscite to actually hold that referendum.
David, I checked that quite specifically, and I know Julie was saying that no, we declare our independence. So, and I thought John was the same there, but I don't know. Well, sorry, I'm confused then if John's saying something different. Sorry.
To put words in the mouth, and I don't think it's a declaration of UDI.
Can I just say something, Stephanie?
Thanks,
the idea that we are putting any pressure on Boris Johnson just now is laughable. He's got an 80 MP majority. He's not in a corner. Down in Westminster, nobody cares about Scotland. They do not care. He's already put the mechanisms in place to strip us out with the Internal Markets Bill, to take control via the Privy Council, and we are about to head back to having basically a Secretary of State for Scotland, and we're going to be run with whoever they put in charge as a Viceroy. It might be Ruth Davidson, it might be someone else, to run Scotland and Westminster's behalf. That is where we're heading. This is slipping away from us, and while we're standing still, Boris Johnson is not, and he's under no pressure whatsoever from you. But you might as well take your MPs and walk home from Westminster just now. It would have more impact if you did that seriously. I'm not saying that's a joke. It would have more impact.
I have to say,
because you're being insulted down there.
I think the show that's going on though, Julie, and the very fact we're being insulted, and that has been demonstrated over and over and over again. People are watching it in their TVs every day. I think that in itself actually is incredibly useful, believe it or not.
But they're not watching.
I think that sort of brings us on to the next point. Again, I would ask if we could answer this concisely, given the constraints and time that we have in the overrun.
Sorry, I'm not doing very well at being concise.
Definitely, but
I'm not known for it.
So Boris Johnson has basically said he's going to go to court to block any further in the referendum if Nicola comes forward and asks for a Section 30, or we use the powers that the Scottish Parliament has at the moment to ask an advisory referendum. So given that position and the announcement today that the British government are looking to increase the number of nuclear warheads by 88, I think they're looking to go up to 268 nuclear warheads, and that they are all based in Scottish waters, 20 miles from our largest city. Do you think that SNPs should stand down en masse and move on block to force by-elections on a plebiscite for independence if Boris Johnson moves to block any moves for the Scottish Parliament? Julie?
Oh, I knew you were going to do that, David. Are we talking about MPs here or MSPs?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did I say MSPs? I meant MPs.
MPs.
They should come home. They're not doing themselves any favours.
Yeah, I think I don't see any point in having our MPs down Westminster anymore. I really don't. They're just laughing at us. So I would certainly be in favour of bringing them home at the very least. By-elections is another issue. I mean, there is a risk inherent in that you might that it might not work out. But I would certainly be in favour of them coming home, David, and just making that point. After all, what's the point of them being there just now? They're just being laughed at.
Okay, John.
Yeah, I think the issue, the more serious issue is the fact that Boris Johnson's talking about buying more nuclear weapons, and as you said, they'll be sited in Faslane. The difficulty, and this is one of the reasons why I left the SNP, is that if anybody was around in 2012 would have heard me from the platform of the SNP conference arguing against SNP policy regarding the future of membership of NATO. Now, I've been involved in CND for a number of years, and I'm totally opposed to nuclear weapons. The difficulty is these nuclear weapons will be sited in Faslane. We know they'll operate for Faslane, and whether or not the Scottish government has no power to actually stop them from putting them in Faslane. And I do think there has to be serious consideration given by the SNP about what type of action they're going to try and do to highlight the situation in relation to policies like that. And that goes back to the point I was making earlier, is Westminster can make decisions, impose them on Scotland, and imposing nuclear weapons in Scotland is a major travesty. Having nuclear weapons at all in Scotland is a travesty. And no, what are the SNP going to do? What are they going to do to get rid of nuclear weapons in Scotland? Because it's really, and what action are they prepared to take to highlight the dissatisfaction or the disgust at a decision to spend our taxpayers' money to buy more weapons of mass destruction and site them in Scotland because they can't site them anywhere else in the UK.
Oh, you're on mute, David.
Your choice now, Steph.
Well, I'm a CND member as well. Always been against nuclear weapons. They're an absolute abomination. They disgust me. I actually love looking onto them 74, and I see them driving them up the motorway in front of me, and it makes me sick to my stomach. It's just disgusting and it's horrible. John saying there about, what are the SNP going to do? What were the SNP able to do when they decided to renew Trident? The reality is Bairns Not Bombs, I think, is the one that's the best known one there as well. We should be using that money to invest in our people and in our communities. The idea of spending it in nuclear weapons is it's utter madness. But I think, I think what's happening just now, you're limited as to what the SNP can do. You're absolutely limited because it's not a policy area that we deal with. But as far as bringing our MPs home because of it, like I said before, what's actually happening just now is it's an absolute circus. We are absolutely being ignored. Yes, they're absolutely making a fool of us, but you know what? It's there for all to see. And maybe not everybody at home is sitting watching it on their TV, but it's wider than that. We've got, at an international level, we've got other countries who are watching just now what is happening in Scotland. And it comes back to my point about the Section 30 as well. What we're doing is we're walking up to every door and we're banging on it. And Boris Johnson is slamming it in our face right in front of everybody. We're exhausting every possible democratic route that we can take. And if we get a no when we ask for a Section 30, if we get a 50% of the vote looking for an independence referendum, then what options do we have? Boris Johnson wants to take us to court. I say absolutely come ahead, Boris Johnson. go give it your best shot, because at the end of the day, people can see that we've done everything that we can to take every possible legitimate route. And if he slams the door in our face after that, then, you know, it's time to go to court, and it's time to look at international law, and it's time to make sure that the people of Scotland have the international right to choose their own future.
If you can't get past an obstacle, you go around it. Okay, you need to stop playing. SNP needs to stop playing into Westminster's barrel. You're playing into their barrel by sitting down there. You're playing into their barrel with Section 30. You need to start doing something different and mixing it up. Seriously. Okay, take it from one that knows.
I think we'll need to agree to differ on that one, Julie.
Right, okay.
I mean, I think whatever way we look at it, I think the Section 30 order, which lies in the hands of the Westminster government, is a Gordian knot, shall we say, for you know, the sort of legitimate route to independence. I'll move
Keep them
on.
in the hook, make them say no.
No, I think it's one of these things that the Gordian knot, you can't unfankle it, so you really need to just cut through it. I think that's the easiest way to deal with that. I think that's really all the questions. I do have a cheeky one here for Julie, but it's not really on the subject matter.
Oh God, it's great.
So we can extend it to John as well. Going forward, after let's look into the looking glass and go forward. We get a Scottish government again. The vagaries. If we get a Scottish government, I think we can pause it in both. Sorry, this question in both. With or without an SNP or independence majority in the next Parliament, would AFI or the ISP look to stand candidates in the following year's local authority elections?
Well, I can give a quick answer to that. Yes. Mm-hmm. We would run candidates in the council elections, David. Yeah, don't see any problem with that.
Right, John.
In terms of Action for Independence, we have even discussed fielding candidates in the local government election. Our priority is getting a super max in terms of this election in the May the 6th, and hopefully, instead of worrying about local government elections, we should be either have independence and an election for a free independent Scotland Parliament, rather than worrying about local government.
We're not.
elections.
Can I come back on that? We're not worrying about it, John. Okay, and it is possible. It is possible to walk and talk at the same.
I said Action for Independence aren't worrying about it, Julie.
Right. Okay.
ISP.
Okay. The implication.
It's not on our agenda. It's not on our agenda.
Yeah. The implication was there. Okay, but yeah, I mean, we'll feel people, because, you know, as I say, the way that we're looking at this, and the way that we have built ISP is we are here for the long game. This is why we're building ourselves as a party, and part of that is getting into local government, you know, and getting any influence where we can, where with regard to independence and pushing back unionism. So I take the view that we should be up for everything. This is done from grassroots. So nobody should be turning their noses up at council elections or whatever. We've all landed in an election year that you know, it has to do with MSPs and stuff. But local authorities in the own way are every bit as important in this battle, and we've got to contest everything. So yeah, bring it on.
No problem. Okay, last question, and then we'll wind it up for this evening. And basically, it's a question that it sort of sums up, I think, the whole discussion that we've been having tonight, and that is SNP 1 and 2 about party political position in a Scottish Parliament rather than the outright independence majority.
Yes.
Sorry, David, can you say that again? My Wi-Fi went a wee bit.
Okay, as I said, it's a very simple question, and it is, as an SNP 1 and 2, is it more about a party political position within the Scottish Parliament rather than an outright independence majority?
Well, for a start, 1 and 2 isn't a thing. It's 2 different ballot papers that you put a cross on. So please don't put numbers 1 or 2 in your boxes there. No, it's absolutely not.
Votes SNP, sorry. It's
Yeah.
SNP. Maybe going back to the last council election.
No, I would definitely say, David, that it's about, for me, it's absolutely 100% about independence. It's not about the political parties in the Scottish Parliament. It's about actually moving forward and getting their independence. I don't care what party it is that you would normally vote for. It is absolutely my belief that if you want independence, the best possible way to do it, our biggest strength, is to get as many SNP MSPs to the Scottish Parliament in May. That's what our opposition are absolutely terrified of. So do you know what? Let's absolutely give it to them.
Okay, thanks for that. And we'll finish with yourself, John.
I think the problem is that some in the SNP see it as simply an election to get a government elected, rather than looking at it as to get independence. And as I've said throughout tonight, what I'm looking for is the supermajority that can push for independence, and then hopefully when we do get independence, we can have elections that people can actually vote for the political views or parties that represent their political views, and we can have a government that is reflective of the wider views Stephanie mentioned earlier. We've got to take the 45%, let's say, that don't vote for independence along with us. When you get a majority in favour of independence, then they can vote for parties that can challenge the political policies or independent Scottish government, as I said earlier, free from Westminster control, and we can get policies that truly reflect the wishes of the Scottish people and parties that represent the wide spectrum of political support, including the wide spectrum of political support that exists within the SNP.
Well said, John.
Thank you all on behalf of Yes Bellshill and Mossend for coming along tonight and talking on this very important issue, and it's very topical at the time. Thanks for your input. Hope those who have watched this live tonight or will pick it up later, hope this helps with your thought processes going forward for May the 6th. I'd just like to remind everybody that no political party has votes. We as an electorate and members of political parties lend those to parties to exercise on behalf of ourselves in a democratic manner. Some unionist parties do think that they have a divine right to rule and govern over us, but my thoughts on that are the same as my Covenant and ancestors. There's no such thing as divine rule, and it's for the common weal to decide in what way they're looked after democratically, I suppose. So without any more wittering from me, I would like to thank you all again, and good luck to all.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David, and thanks, John, and thanks, Julie. I nearly said Colette there. You can't help but read people's names, can you?
I know, but I'm on their account just now. This is their general account, so.
No, thanks to both of you. It's been a really good discussion. If it gets some interest going in this subject, then brilliant.
Yeah.
And I hope some of the questions weren't too hard or awkward for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for your organising.
Are we offline just now? Or,
See that breaking through that flag? That looks magic, doesn't it?